Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Are you concerned about your workplace culture? Do you have low employee engagement ratings? Are you losing employees and having a hard time replacing them? Does there seem to be a lot of negativity and cynical comments about employees and among employees? Most leaders don't really know how to create a more positive work culture. The tools they've been given, positive emails and employee recognition programs, don't work anymore. It's because not everyone feels appreciated in the same ways, and if the recognition given isn't perceived as authentic, you're wasting your time, energy, and your money. Learn how to use the 5 languages of appreciation to communicate appreciation in the language and actions desired by each employee. This new book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, has sold over 325,000 copies and has been translated into 17 languages. It's been used by Microsoft, NASA, the Centers for Disease Control, the $1 Million Roundtable, ExxonMobil, DirecTV, L'Oreal, Compassion International, and numerous other national and multinational organizations. Recently revised and updated, this new version includes information on the generational differences in how team members want to be shown appreciation, communicating appreciation effectively to remote employees, the importance of colleagues learning how to communicate appreciation to one another, the extensive research that demonstrates the positive impact that occurs in business functioning and profitability when staff really feel appreciated. Based on the #1 New York Times bestseller, The 5 Love Languages, Dr. Chapman and Dr. Paul White give practical steps to make any workplace environment more encouraging and productive. Readers will learn to speak and understand the unique languages of appreciation and be able to communicate authentic appreciation. Dr. Paul White is a psychologist, speaker, and leadership trainer who makes work relationships work. Dr. White is the co-author of 3 books, including The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, written with Dr. Gary Chapman, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The 5 Love Languages. He recently authored The Vibrant Workplace. As a speaker and trainer, Dr. White has taught around the world, including North America, Europe, South America, Asia, and the Caribbean. He's also written articles for and been interviewed by Bloomberg's Business Week, CNNFortune.com, Entrepreneur.com, Fast Company, FoxBusiness.com, Huffington Post Live, U.S. News and World Report, and Yahoo Finance. For more information about Dr. White, please visit his website at www.appreciationatwork.com and www.drpaulwhite.com. Here to talk about the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace is Dr. Paul White himself. Dr. White, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you. We've had Dr. Chapman on with us before and talking about God's love languages, his new work, and it was just a delight to have him on. It's a delight to have all of the co-authors that have produced works with him kind of in this series of things that he's contributed to based on this one platform that has grown into a very large reach in expanding it to so many different environments. What brought the two of you together?
So I'm a psychologist by training, and for a number of years, one of my focuses was on consulting with family-owned businesses and dealing with the family issues that intertwine with business, and especially business succession. And in the midst of one of those engagements, I was in North Carolina dealing with a family. I was talking to the CEO and the patriarch and said, how's it going as far as the transition plan? He said, it's going good. My son's stepping up, and I think it's going to work. I walk across the hall and ask the son the same question, and he says, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. I can't do anything to please my dad. And my wife and I were reading the 5 love languages at the time. And so I thought, maybe this could apply to work. So I actually pursued Dr. Chapman for over a year and finally got together with him and pitched the idea of developing an online assessment, which we created, the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory. And we just crossed 180,000 people yesterday as far as the number of people taking it. And so did that, developed some training resources for various groups, and then wrote the book. And the first version came out in 2011, and it's sold more every year than the prior year since then. And we revised and updated it. It came out in January, and we're really pleased about how well it's going and being able to help people and organizations.
You know, we tend to look at the 5 love languages as a universal work that transcends Christianity, but nevertheless has its foundation in the gospel message of loving one another, of expressing love, of understanding love, of love being patient, love being kind, love keeping no records of wrong, 1 Corinthians 13. That applies the same way in the workplace as well, these same fundamental principles. Did you come at this from a faith foundation, or did you come about this from a more organizational development foundation?
Well, probably both. I mean, I'm a follower of Christ myself, and what's interesting to me as we've worked with the concept and developed it is it's amazing. I've never had anybody say, I don't want to be appreciated for what I do. I
Right.
mean, and I think part of it is in the nature of how God made us, that, we're created to worship Him. Not that we're supposed to worship one another, obviously, but I think, yes, we're supposed to be motivated on our own, but, we like to know that somebody else values what we do as well. And so it fits with the nature of it. And what's interesting, when comparing to a secular worldview where you take God out of the picture and out of the workplace, it degrades to just a performance results based kind of recognition that we only really value people that when they perform well, and at some level people start to resent that they're I often ask, I said, is anybody here in the room besides me a person outside of work, and so people want to be valued as people, not just what they do. And so that's really a core message that we give, and that it also helps. And one of the cool things about, like the new version is we have a chapter on essentially the return on investment for businesses, and cite over 50 specific research studies by Gallup, by Towers, Perrin, Boston Consulting Group, that show that when team members feel valued, the business or organization functions better, and there's a lot of specific things that improve. So it's a both and. I mean, when we apply God's truth to life, things tend to go better than if we don't.
Have you found in your study, and you did some research, obviously, to determine how corporations used to express appreciation in order for us to be able to embrace a new way of appreciation. So employee recognition programs in the past, how were they based?
Well, there were sort of 2 major pathways. One was the recognition for length of service, right? I mean, so you've been here 5 years, you've been here 10 years, and you get maybe a pen, and then you get a watch or whatever it might be, and that's fine. And I think we should honor people who have been there and have been faithful and loyal, but that's not real motivating. I mean, it's not like I'm going to work for another 5 years and feel real motivated to get some other little thing. And in fact, Canada did a thorough national research study and found that not only was length of service the number one thing people were recognized for, but the number one thing they got was a certificate, or a plaque, which you were telling me your own stories. And then the second pathway has been for performance, recognition for performance, which when it's designed and implemented well, which unfortunately isn't that often, it can reward people doing what we want. I mean, we want people to answer the phone cheerfully. We want them to get their paperwork done and reports to be accurate and make sales and so forth. And so there's a performance-based track of recognition. But what's interesting about that is that only tends to reach about the top 10 or 15% of an organization. And it's the same top 10 or 15 over and over. And so you have a big middle group of good employees, solid employees doing their best, but they're not your stars. And if they don't get to that recognition level, they don't ever hear anything. And one of the things we know is that 79% of the people who leave work voluntarily, who quit on their own, cite a lack of appreciation as one of the main reasons that they leave. Most business managers and supervisors think people leave for more money, but that's actually not the case. We know that money is not a very good motivator or sustainer of motivation. So so we had that recognition thing, and unfortunately, when things get sort of pulled into the corporate world in design, it loses heart, right? And it becomes mechanical and it becomes generic. And, it's sort of the same kind of award ceremony year after year with the certificates and all that kind of stuff. And it ceases to be perceived either as personal or genuine. And so people then, at the least, dismiss it and then become apathetic and cynical and sarcastic about it.
We spend so much time in investigating organizational development, human resources. Most of these corporations, the major corporations, have had the same recognition programs in place for
decades. Really.
Truly decades.
Yeah.
I came out of the AT&Ts and the Hewlett-Packards, but if I talk to a Xerox person, an IBM person, they all know the exact same reward structure,
right.
same thing, just different name. In all what were the Fortune 50 companies, and we all use the same kind of sales training,
right.
Same kind of manuals. How has that changed from even into the world of education, in business education? Are we seeing a shift in how we're raising up or training and teaching at the university level, preparing in the business schools for people to enter this environment, because they're doing case studies of successful corporations, case studies of IBM, case studies of AT&T, case studies of Hewlett-Packard. And
right.
if they're doing case studies of the companies, they're also looking at recognition programs and the like.
Well, you would think so. You would think so. But and I know that education is a slow industry, if you will, to change. And so, they're inherently just glacial. And so what's interesting is the style and method of teaching to case studies, like within MBA programs, has changed. But the focus remains on what they would call is, the hard stuff. I mean, the financial data. And so, controlling expenses and looking at long-term investments and capitalization and so forth. And only recently has there been more focus. And in fact, there's actually a sort of a movement to look at the soft skills, because there's research that shows, in fact, we cite one study that shows that if you look at the top 25% of organizations with regards to how appreciated their staff feel, compare them to the lowest 25%, top 25% are 22% more profitable. And so, 22%, especially year over year, that's not a small number. And so there's becoming a pressure from investors, right, and shareholders for leaders to focus on the soft skills, because that's really what makes a difference. And probably, I mean, there's a lot of different places. We've got good research that shows that when people feel truly valued and appreciated, they stay longer. I mean, there's less turnover, and turnover is the number one unproductive cost to a business. And we know other things happen. There's less absenteeism. There's less internal conflict. There's higher productivity. There's a higher customer service ratings. Interestingly, in sort of what I would call tough guy industries, construction and so forth, there's fewer accidents on the job, and there's also less employee theft, which sort of makes sense. I mean, if you don't feel valued, you're going to say, hey, they owe me this, they're not paying me, or they don't, really value me. So, I'll take this on my own. So it's turning, but it's a slow ship to turn.
When the vernacular of industry changed from human resources to human capital, did that elevate or degrade the perception of the person within the organization?
Great question. And I think it depends. It's both, right? I think it depends on the perspective of the leaders, if you will, and the management of their human capital, of the people, because as we were sharing earlier, that when you take God out of the picture of life or work, people become a resource to help you achieve your goals, and that's typically status, money, and so forth. And so they become like a machine. I mean, in the same capital sense. So for some organizations, I think it degraded the sense of value of people. And sometimes we forget that employees are people, and they were people first, and they're going to be people after they, are employees. And on the other hand, for people who have and leaders who have a sense of the value of their employees, I think it enhanced their focus and attention on, hey, we need to treat these people with respect. We need to get their input on things that affect them. We need to let them know that we do value them. And so I think it's sort of depending on which environment you're in, that shift from HR to human capital had differential impact.
Because it's interesting, and it may be semantics, but you only depreciate capital.
Yeah. Well, in semantics, you know what? Words matter, right?
They do.
That. I know that.
So on the on the balance sheet, plant, property, and equipment, capital,
right,
only loses value on paper. And so when we move people to human capital, did we depreciate them from year to year, or did we appreciate them, which is counterintuitive to the financial accounting world, is that an asset never goes up in value once you bought it. Like when you drive your car off the lot, depreciation begins. It does not ever increase in value unless it reaches its point of collectability, and that's a 50-year period in which it becomes an antique and a collectible and a classic and all those things. And do I have to work for a company for 50 years to become an antique, a classic, and to be appreciated and start increasing in value? And
I would generally agree with that. There's one exception, though, and that's real property in the sense of land. It can appreciate. It doesn't always, but it can. And I think that is the other way to look at that terminology issue, is that, yeah, human or capital is depreciated, but it's also an asset on the balance sheet, right? And so your human capital is an asset, whether or not you treat it that way or what you do with it to help it develop and appreciate value to the company. I think that's sort of a secondary issue. But if you treat them with respect, then they are an asset versus a liability.
When you began the research for this and you took a look at what companies were doing, and then you introduced the new concept of the new way to approach the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, what were some of the more shocking discoveries that you found?
Well, what was interesting is that there's the 5 love languages, and so they're words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and physical touch. And, taking physical touch to the workplace, there was all kinds of, I'm not sure about this. And this was before the issues we've had over the past couple of years. But, I mean, that they've come out. They've always been there, right? And as we talk to leaders, they're like, I understand the physical touch, but it makes me uncomfortable. And what's interesting is that we decided to keep it in the model for a couple reasons. One is, both Dr. Chapman and I felt like we don't want to advocate a touchless society even in the workplace.
Right.
Because appropriate physical touch in a healthy relationship can be very meaningful. It can be healing, as most healing professionals can tell you. But the other part is it happens. Now, there's regional differences, and both within the U.S. and across cultures, and, we work with multiple cultures. But, in the southern part of the U.S., they're more comfortable with physical touch and at least side hugs and that kind of stuff. In New York, it's sort of, you nod from across the room and say, hey, that's about as close as you get. But the other part, I mean, it's really about spontaneous celebration, right? So it's a high five when you finish a project, or a fist bump when you solve a problem, a congratulatory handshake on a sale, even a pat on the back. We always I was working with a group of women leaders, and they said, yeah, but two pats and no circular motion. So, I mean, even that's got to be defined. But what's interesting, it's rarely anybody's primary language, but it's still an important piece that fits in the big picture. And without it, it does feel somewhat incomplete. And to be honest, I mean, there is the inappropriate aspect, but it's largely driven about fears of lawsuits. If you took that piece out, there would be a lot more freedom about it. So that was one interesting thing. The other thing is that when we first started, we really focused on top-down relationships. I mean, supervisors and managers to their direct reports. And fairly quickly, we got feedback from people that said, hey, I want to know how to encourage or show appreciation to my colleagues, and I value appreciation for my colleagues. And what we found is that doing sort of a both-and model of teaching both leaders and supervisors, but also having them take their team members through the training really makes this sing. And part of it is it releases pressure from the supervisor and manager that they feel like they have to do it all, because it is overwhelming and they shouldn't have to. And so when they're part of that, it empowers the individual as well. And so one of the things we found, you can start at any point in the organization. In fact, we don't encourage a top-down implementation that everybody has to do this, because that undermines perceived authenticity, right? And so including colleagues and peers and letting people join when they're ready to really makes it go well. And we've gone across national organizations just sort of that way. Start with a little pilot project here and there, and then it grows from there.
You know, coming out of the culture of gamesmanship, which was the culture I came from, which was the person to the left of me was the enemy. The person to the right of me was the enemy. I was to do everything I could to surpass them. If I had to put my foot on their shoulder to climb up over them, that's exactly what I would do. And that was expected of me. I was a road warrior,
right,
a rainmaker, and I was purely judged on my own performance. There was no team. There was only the I. The team concept didn't exist in the 35 years that I spent in corporate America. There was no team.
Right.
You had your core team that supported you, and I was incredibly generous. I recently read where a golf pro won a tournament. He won $1.25 million, and he gave a $5,000 gift to the caddy. And he said, you know, I was only supposed to give him $1,000. I gave him $5,000. What's the deal? And they're saying, you know, these guys usually get about 20%, and you know, you beat him out of a couple $100,000. And he goes, no, I paid him 5 times more than I told him I would. And so I was very generous with my team when it came to bonuses and when it came to trips and when it came to things like that. There were times when I would defer and give it to another couple and make sure that the people that made me, that were girding me up, were rewarded. And it wasn't just the guy who was the one that was on the top line of the leaderboard.
Cool.
And other people began to see that was effective because my people worked harder. They worked on weekends. They would take calls over holidays. They would do things above and beyond because they felt appreciated. But as far as the guy to the right and the left of me in a sales meeting, it's like, you know, I'm going to listen to your report only because I want to see where your weakness is. I want to see where you know, when you're forecasting only an 8% increase, I'm going to right away redline my report, all right, and I'm going to forecast a 12% increase, and I'm going to go back to the team and tell them, guys, we got to bump it up 25% because that's who our competition is. And so it was a very competitive environment that drove corporate America up until I left it in the 2000s. You know,
and there's still aspects of that. I mean, clearly, I mean, especially I would say within banking and finance and high-level sales, there's still that aspect. But you know, we did research this past year with comparing millennials specifically with older employees, and I think there was like 85,000 people in the study, so it was significant. And looked at how they were the same or different in what they wanted to be shown appreciation for, or how. And interestingly, I mean, the themes are largely the same. I mean, that words are the primary language that most people choose. In the general population, it's about 45% of employees, value words. Now, there's differences within that. We can talk about that. Quality time is second. Acts of service is third. Tangible gifts is fourth, only about 5 to 6%. And then 1% or less is physical touch. Well, for millennials, words is still high, but time really pops up, and they're almost equal. And acts of service is in there. But when we looked at quality time, one of the things we did with our inventory is just finding out the language isn't really sufficient. I mean, just knowing time. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, we then created a follow-up section where you identify the specific actions that you like and from whom you want them. And so for some people, they would like time with their manager or supervisor to either, talk or get input or just hang out. But younger workers really want to hang out with colleagues. And I tell leaders today, just because you have a team member that has quality time as a language doesn't mean they want time with you, right? You may be great and all that, but they want to hang out at lunch and after work with their friends. And so there used to be saying you don't leave a job, you leave a supervisor or a manager. That's less and less true. More and more younger employees, if things are going okay with their peers, they can endure some tension here. But if it's not going well with their peers, they're more likely to leave.
It's quite interesting. We're talking with Dr. Paul White, who co-authored with Dr. Gary Chapman the revised and updated the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, empowering organizations by encouraging people. Fascinating read, a fascinating concept, especially for me that spent 35 years in corporate America before I went into full-time ministry. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into more about the psychology and the motivation of what these languages are, how they apply in the workplace, and how you can begin applying immediately some of these concepts even today as you wait for the book to arrive. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of 2 Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. Take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English, and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Paul White, co-author with Dr. Gary Chapman of the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, Empowering Organizations by Encouraging People. Paul White, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You talked about the millennials, and one of the things that I've discovered from a ministerial perspective in relationship to church building, church planting, relating to millennials, is that there's another factor, and it's not just collegial, it's relevance. Mm-hmm. And that they want to do things together, but what they do together, they want it to be relevant. It's not just hang out, but hang out and do something relevant. And this is kind of an interesting concept because it's a community within the ranks of this age group that and the example that I give in this is that one of the fastest growing ministries in Israel is called the Beautiful Land Initiative. It is a pre-evangelical interest, and it gathers groups together that come in to visit Israel and helps them clean. Their initiative is to clean up the beaches of Israel. Mm-hmm. So they go out and visitors come and spend an afternoon with them and help stuff trash bags. Well, they found out that that was great, but what do they do afterwards? They had this big stack of trash bags, and they did a video, and everybody was yahoo and jumped up and down. And right. Then they said, well, maybe we should get a burning permit, and instead of having them haul it away, burn it and have a campfire. Well, then we should get somebody with a guitar. And then we should do, what kind of music should we do? Well, we want to be a little bit evangelical, so let's do some contemporary praise and worship and engage, and local Israelis would come, and groups would come, Christian groups would come, local Israelis would come, and they'd want to get involved and say, well, we don't have the words, so they would print the words, and they would hand out the words, and people would start to get involved. And they say, well, we got a fire, and we got music, we got people, but we got no food. Yeah. So let's use this to have a cookout. So they start at now 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and now it's sundown. The fire's now burned down to those embers, and people are now talking, and they're saying, why do you do this? Well, because we love the land. Well, why do you love the land? Well, we love the land because this is God's people, and this is God's land. This is the land of the book. And well, what does that mean? And well, you're not from here, and you're a Baptist? You know, right. And so the dialogue gets opened up by the relevance of the activity of the quality time that now takes on a deeper meaning, kind of this mimicking of the Acts chapter 2 model, where there was like work, which was they gathered together in the courtyards of the temple studying, but then they went to the homes and they had this community celebration, and they talked, and they broke bread together, and they exchanged gifts with each other. I see you don't have a jacket, I've got an extra one. And then it says, in the end, God added to their numbers those daily those being saved. And so this was the kind of like the environment that built community. And this was really kind of a model of what we're now seeing again, kind of a revival of this model of people want relevant interaction. And right. We have a very affluent, technologically affluent workforce that's young.
Right.
That one of the ways that they are incentivized is with new technology. Mm-hmm. That they get to work on something that's breakthrough, right. That's right, now, right. And that's something that from an engineering in Western Electric, that was something that was motivated to the Western Electric people, but not motivating to the AT&T sales force.
Right.
So how do you gauge, how do you customize and integrate these languages and then add subsets to them which are appropriate to the audience?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, it's got to be relevant to them. And in fact, so we have our inventory, the Motivating by Appreciation inventory, and a code for taking it comes with the book, or you can go to our website, Appreciation at Work, and it's the word at, but appreciationatwork.com, and just buy codes for people. And you identify your primary language of appreciation, your secondary, your least valued one, which is sort of your blind spot. It's the one that doesn't interest you, but you're going to have colleagues that have that. But then you go back and identify the specific actions. So like with words, it could be that you just would like, somebody to compliment you or write you an email. Sometimes some people will say, well, I wouldn't mind, being, sort of called out in front of my team, and I don't mind you saying something but we find that about 40% of the employee force don't want to go up in front of a big group to be recognized. And so you can identify the specific actions. And then what we found is it differs across work settings, right? So an act of service in a school might be that one teacher watches another teacher's kids so she can make some phone calls, or in a hospital, a nurse may cover another nurse's patient light so they can get caught up on, charting. So we've developed different versions for different work settings. So we have one for school, for government, for the military, for not-for-profits and ministries, for medical settings, and then remote workers, which is an important one related to the relevance, is that we did research this last year on comparing face-to-face employee relationships with remote employees. And again, quality time popped up. But here's the interesting thing is that really two main points came out. One is that remote employees like to have connection by video. That just email, text, phone, that's okay, but even I have a remote employee that works in another state. When we have a team meeting, we do at least part of it by video, so you can see her and chat and all that, because we like that facial recognition. But the other thing about remote employees is that if, there's a difference in that when you work remotely, you can't go stop by somebody's office and see how they're doing, or you don't run into them on the way in from the parking lot or at the break room. You don't have sort of those spontaneous, informal interactions. And what we found is if you work in or supervise remote employees, you've got to sort of structure those, because otherwise all your communication is about tasks. And it's just like, we're going to meet about getting this done and, planning for that and, with a report. And they literally then become just sort of, a work unit, a production unit. And so to really effectively relate and show value and appreciation to remote employees, you need to set up times to just talk and chat and say, hey, what'd you do this weekend, or, what'd you think about, Super Bowl or whatever game it is, or how are your kids doing? If you don't do that, it just becomes very clinical, very, fact-oriented and impersonal. And so it's really important to have that personal aspect, but you have to plan for it in advance more so in a remote setting.
In dealing with remote employees, is there an emphasis, or should there be an emphasis on making sure that there is some kind of annual gathering or some way to make them, it's hard to relate even with video, which I think is important. I think that was probably the motivation for Apple with FaceTime, is that grandparents get to interact more with the grandchildren.
Right.
You know, you get to talk to the baby, you get to see the baby. You live in such a remote part that FaceTime becomes more personal. I have a 30-year-old daughter expecting her first child, and so we FaceTime each other. Makes me feel closer to her because I can see her. And so we know that from a social one-on-one family connection, families stay closer together. Back in the day when we created picture phone meeting service, it was so that remote collaborative groups could get together, or clients could get together and see a presentation without us having to put a group of people on a plane and spend $20,000. So it was a great cost savings, and it still is a great cost savings, but where do you draw the line on the cost savings to make sure that, and I think that from the love languages, the physical touch becomes not physical touch so much as physical connection, not so much as physical touch, and that's in regards to the remote employee, that if they're never brought to the headquarters or they're never brought into the collaborative group personally and put on a plane or at some interval comes to an event, they begin to wonder, I guess all these guys go out to lunch together every day, they're really close, I'm never going to get anywhere in the company because I'm not part of the group, so I'm going to look for something locally where I can be a part of a group, and then I have this attrition rate where companies invest a great deal of money to train a remote and equip a remote employee, and now they're losing that return on that investment because they have not connected that person. Is that a potential fallout?
Yeah, and you raise an interesting situation that we actually had to deal with this last year. Was hired by a small part of one of the big computer organizations to help them communicate appreciation among a virtual team. That is literally everybody's in a different, not everybody, but most everybody's in a different country, right? And it was an utter failure. And part of it was maybe our fault, probably was. Part of it was their fault. And part of it, I believe, is that you got to have a personal relation. In other words, and I've had salespeople say, well, how do I use the five languages to show appreciation to my customers? It's a dangerous thing because their appreciation is based on valuing a person. And so there needs to be a personal relationship. You can recognize somebody for what they do and all that, that's fine. But if you try to show appreciation to somebody you don't really have a relationship with, it either feels superficial and sort of just made up, or it feels manipulative, right? And so I think there is a limit to what you can do virtually. I think you can have, obviously, a personal relationship. I just met this weekend for the first time a guy who's our web developer, has been for a couple of years. We have a relationship, but clearly it's a different kind of relationship. Now, I met his wife and his kids as well, you know, and I think there needs to be that kind of touchstone. Whether it needs to be, it's going to help improve things. And if you just try to have what I would call a functional team, in other words, they get together and they have a function, they get something done and show appreciation, I don't know yet how that could work. Maybe we'll figure it out, but I think there has to be a personal relationship, which takes time. Relationships are built better in various contexts, so you don't see, so you know, it's sort of like if you work with somebody, you only see them at the office, your relationship only grows so far, versus if you see them at a restaurant or out at a game or whatever. So yeah, I think there's got to be some effort and investment in that. Otherwise, you know, there's only going to be so much, there's going to be a limit to the connectivity between your team members.
In hearing you talk, the words appreciation and recognition keep coming up, and there's a clear distinction between the two, but they are not mutually exclusive.
Correct.
So by showing appreciation, you're not doing away with recognition,
right?
But recognition is not always received as appreciation.
Right. Well, yeah, great point. So not everybody differentiates it. I think it is becoming more and more so. Recognition is largely about performance, to be honest. I mean, it's about what you do, and that's fine, and that's okay. And you can appreciate somebody for what they do. I mean, that's true as well. But appreciation, the way I sort of differentiate it to, recognition is largely behavior, right? It's behavior by the manager. You're setting up goals, you're monitoring, and you're rewarding, okay? It's behavioral. It's easy to scale up that way, okay? But appreciation is both behavior and, I believe, heart attitude. And the heart attitude is that you value the person, that it's not just what they do, but you appreciate that, they're either dependable or they're cheerful and one of the things, if you're dealing with lower performers, can you appreciate them? Yes, but it's not necessarily about what they're not doing well. Maybe they're a great parent. You have a single mom who's on your team and she just committed to her kids and say, man, Maria, I just think I am so impressed with how much you love your kids and you're there for them. Is that about work? No. Is it going to build some relationship and support her? Yeah. Or if you have a person, let's call him David, that's training for a half marathon, you can say, man, I just think it's cool you have the self-discipline to do that. And it's about them as a person, but not necessarily about work. And that gives you the entree to be able to have a relationship, build some support, and maybe you're then able to better impact and help shape them as far as their performance. But yeah, recognition it's impersonal. It can come from the CEO that doesn't know you. And that's part of the problem, is that it often feels very organizational and mechanical. And that's okay if it's supposed to be for recognition for performance. But the problem is when organizations and corporations, what they're trying to do is use recognition for appreciation as a person, and people resent that and they react to it.
In your case study, when you went into an organization that did not have the application of the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, and you implemented a program where you trained and you gave them the tools, you did assessments, and you found out, and then you began to affect change in the organization. What were some of the results that you saw in direct relationship to the implementation of the expression of the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace?
One of the most fun examples I have is a mining group in South Dakota and Colorado and Wyoming. And often we found the best model for change for us is for me to come in and speak to whatever level of leadership they want. Give them the big picture, give them the language so they can talk about it together. And then we have a implementation kit, an online train the trainer course. It takes a couple hours to go through, and then have videos and PowerPoints that they can internally take to specific teams, whether it's accounting or customer service or whatever, take them through that. So we did that with this group, and they were wonderful. And over the past 2 years, they've gone out to all the different places. And what makes it work is that the concepts are true and work, but you also have to tweak them to contextualize it. And what happens is when people get it, and when they see it modeled from their leaders, that it's not just, do this, and it's over time, they start to incorporate it into their culture. And what happened here is that the mostly guys said, hey, we have some visual symbols for each language. They said, we want stickers to go on our hard hats to wear so that we know what each other's language is. And you have fun with it too, right? It's like, yours is words. Hey, dude, way to go, and we teach them how to give an effective compliment. You make some jokes about it, but when it becomes part of their culture and they sort of figure out how they want to make it work, and I'm doing a podcast with I don't know if she's the vice president, but of the training and development. She said it's changed our culture, and it's reduced turnover. It's more positive, a lot less conflict over stupid little things that really don't matter. Because when you feel valued, you let those things slide. If you don't feel valued, it's a personal offense. And so less turnover, greater productivity. And and it's just a more fun place to work, right? I mean, if there's more positive messages going on, it doesn't take, think about being a psychologist. It's not rocket science, right? It's pretty straight. People, you treat people nice, they tend to like you and want to be around you, and so it works that way.
Do you do this at the management level first and inventory the management team and say, okay, you're going to be the test bed for how we're going to apply this before we roll it out to the general population of the company?
Rarely do I do that, because the management often doesn't get it, right? They're still stuck in the sort of financial aspect. What we do is we go and train, do a session for the managers, probably plus the next level down, mid-level managers or supervisors, and then say, hey, who of you are interested in this and would like to run this with your team? And we get a sort of a volunteer or maybe even a champion and do a pilot study or maybe two and let them do it, and other people are watching and seeing, and then it just grows from there. So, and almost always we're starting in the middle of an organization of people that are interested. And sometimes, like just this last week, I was brought into Dollywood in Tennessee, and it was from somebody not high up, and they got the book to the HR person who got it up, and they brought me in, and now we're going to roll it out. So it's fun that way.
Now, from a historical perspective, because this is a revised and updated edition, and there's 375,000 copies of the prior release already out there, plus the hundreds of thousands of copies that this one will sell, are you able to see whether or not it is taken on an organic growth and spread through organizations who were early adopters and now finding it spreading, or is it still the same group that who embraced it in the first place and are applying it and are successful with it, but it just does it take on a contagion, if you will?
Yeah. Well, it differs, right? Because generally speaking, just some context, the average business book sells 3,000 copies in its lifetime. We are now selling over 4,000 copies a month, and we're selling more every year than we did the prior year. We sold 60,000 copies last year. But within organizations, it differs because some do it, and even against my, judgment advice, it's sort of a one and done kind of thing. We're going to bring Dr. White in and talk about it, and we'll do this and have a nice day. And that obviously doesn't go very far. But when there's commitment from at least some of the management, both of time and energy, and also some resources to fund it, then it tends to grow and go well. And so, and then we have people that we have one large international bank that's sort of been doing it underneath the surface, and now they're coming out and want us to help them with it. And so it's fun to see. And then other people that come back around. What's really interesting is to see that a leader in one organization, I had this happen, got trained in the 5 languages of appreciation, moved to a different organization, and said, hey, we want to bring that over here to his new position. So.
Well, and that's a compliment to both you and to Dr. Chapman. We've been talking with Dr. Paul White, who, along with Dr. Gary Chapman, authored the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, empowering organizations by encouraging people. Radical for the day in changing the paradigm of corporations that were built on recognition, not appreciation, and a move towards connecting with the person and what motivates the person, and what motivates the person ultimately moves the organization in the attitude, in the performance, and in the commitment and the connection. So from employee retention, employee appreciation, feeling a part of an organization and wanting to contribute more has to do with the expression of appreciation in the workplace more than the recognition systems of the old school days that I came out of. I especially appreciate this approach, Dr. White, and thank you and Dr. Chapman for this. I think it's time. It's a book for today and for the millennials and for this generation to be reached, to connect with corporate America in a new way that's going to make them feel relevant, and then they will then take it and expand upon it, and the next iteration will look different than this iteration does, and I look forward to seeing it played out in retail stores and companies that I interact with, and seeing it and saying, oh, I get it. You guys are implementing the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. I can tell because the way you treat each other. So
I look forward to that as well. And thanks for your support. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Dr. White, for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.